You are driving a ticking time bomb, and the worst part is that you paid good money for the privilege. For over 15 years, I have torn down engines, pulled oil samples that sparkled like metallic paint, and fished out mangled rod bearings that never should have failed. When you pull an oil pan off a modern Ford and find the bottom coated in a fine, glittering sludge of bearing material, you stop trusting factory defaults. You start looking at what the engineers programmed into the computer versus what physics actually demands. Today, I am exposing 5 factory settings and operational habits that are quietly destroying your Ford from the inside out without you knowing. Setting number 5 is a convenience feature that is actively cooking your transmission fluid. Setting number 4 is a default operating mode that turns your cooling system into a liability during heavy loads. And setting number 1 is a software calibration so deceptive that most owners actually think it is protecting their engine when it is doing the exact opposite. Let's get into it. Setting 5. The factory transmission warm-up and adaptive shift schedule. Here's the common behavior. You start your Ford up on a freezing winter morning or a scorching summer afternoon, drop it straight into drive, and take off immediately, trusting that the smooth shifting and the lack of dashboard lights mean your powertrain is ready for action. Ford's marketing claim is that their advanced multi-speed automatic transmissions are self-adapting, maintenance-free units engineered to deliver seamless efficiency right out of the box, utilizing low-viscosity Mercon fluids designed to flow instantly in any climate. But here's what Ford doesn't tell you, and what I see every time I tear down a unit that failed prematurely at 60,000 miles. The default adaptive shift schedule is programmed to prioritize immediate fuel economy and silky low RPM upshifts, forcing the transmission to pull heavy loads in higher gears at unacceptably low engine speeds. When you combine this aggressive upshifting with cold, uncirculated transmission fluid, the hydraulic pressure spikes inside the valve body, while internal clutch packs slip microscopically against steel plates before full hydraulic lockup occurs. I have personally inspected clutch friction material burnt to a crisp and floating in valve bodies because the factory shift logic commands high torque loads while the fluid temperature is still sitting at a frigid 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Transmission fluid does not protect your planetary gears, needle bearings, and clutch discs until it reaches its true operating window between 175 and 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Below that threshold, the fluid viscosity is too thick to bleed off properly through microscopic solenoid orifices, leading to delayed engagement and hydraulic hammer shocks inside the casing. Over tens of thousands of cycles, this constant microslippage creates microscopic metal debris that circulates through your fluid, acting like liquid sandpaper on your torque converter clutch lining and oil pump bushings. What should you do instead? Stop trusting the computer to dictate when your vehicle is ready to move. Spend the first 2 to 3 minutes after a cold startup, letting your engine idle down from high cold start fast idle speeds, and when you do pull away, keep your throttle inputs light and avoid demanding heavy acceleration or towing until your instrument cluster transmission fluid temperature gauge climbs past 150 degrees. If your model lacks a dedicated digital temp gauge on the cluster, wait at least 5 minutes of driving before asking the transmission to drop down a gear and pull hard up a grade. That simple pause in your routine preserves fluid shear strength and keeps your clutch packs from glazing over. Setting 4. The factory cooling fan activation threshold. Here's the common behavior. You sit in heavy stop-and-go summer traffic, watching your engine coolant temperature gauge sit rock solid right in the middle, and you assume the cooling system is managing things perfectly because the needle hasn't crept into the red zone. Ford's marketing claim is that their computer-controlled electronic cooling fans are optimized for maximum aerodynamic efficiency and fuel savings, kicking on only when absolute thermal necessity demands it to reduce parasitic drag on the alternator and engine. But here's what Ford doesn't tell you, and what I find stamped into warped cylinder heads and brittle plastic coolant fittings. The factory activation threshold for low-speed fan operation is programmed to kick on at a staggering 215 to 220 degrees Fahrenheit, and high-speed fans often do not scream to life until you cross 230 degrees. Ford sets these thresholds intentionally high because running the engine hotter increases thermal efficiency on an EPA emissions test bench, burning off residual hydrocarbons and boosting calculated fuel economy by a fraction of a percent. The hidden mechanical reality is that aluminum cylinder heads and thin-wall engine blocks hate sustained heat soaking. When your coolant sits at 220 degrees under light hood ventilation in traffic, The actual localized metal temperature around the exhaust valve seats and combustion chambers is spiking past 250 degrees. At this temperature, your engine oil begins to thin out past its optimal shear viscosity, and your factory rubber cooling hoses, plastic thermostat housings, and composite intake manifold gaskets undergo accelerated thermal fatigue. I have pulled apart countless modular and EcoBoost engines where this constant high heat cycling baked the life out of plastic quick disconnect fittings until they shattered like glass under normal operating pressure, dumping every drop of coolant onto the asphalt and dropping valve seats out of aluminum heads. The factory gauge on your dash is a lie built by software smoothing algorithms. It will stay pegged dead center while your actual coolant temperature swings wildly between 195 and 225 degrees, hiding the thermal abuse your engine takes every time you idle in traffic. What should you do instead? Stop idling your vehicle for extended periods in parking lots or drive-thrus on hot days. If you are stuck in gridlock, shift the transmission into neutral and bring the engine up to about 1,200 revolutions per minute for 10 seconds every few minutes to force your mechanical water pump to spin faster and push coolant through the radiator core more aggressively. Or switch your climate control on to manually command the AC compressor clutch to engage, which forces your PCM to override the high-temperature fan delay and spin your cooling fans on low speed immediately. Taking control of that thermal cycle stops the heat soak before it degrades your gaskets and warps your mating surfaces. We just saw how letting your transmission shift cold and letting your coolant bake your engine block in traffic will silently destroy your powertrain before you even make your first truck payment. But we are only halfway down the list, and the settings we are about to hit are the ones dealerships pray you never figure out because they are absolute cash cows for the service department. Setting number 3 is an engine management calibration that actively starves your cylinder walls of lubrication every time you drop below a certain threshold. And setting number 2 is an emissions strategy that pumps abrasive soot directly back into your intake tract, turning your top end into a carbon-packed disaster area. Let's get into it. Setting 3. The factory variable displacement and low-pressure oil control logic. Here is the common behavior. You cruise down the highway at 70 miles per hour with the cruise control locked in, feeling smug about your fuel economy as your instrument cluster tells you your engine is purring along effortlessly on half its cylinders, or dropping into an ultra-low friction operating mode. Ford's marketing claim is that their variable displacement oil pumps and advanced variable valve timing systems use sophisticated electronic solenoids to dynamically modulate oil pressure on the fly, matching lubrication demand precisely to engine load in order to maximize parasitic efficiency and slash fuel consumption. But here's what Ford doesn't tell you, and what I see every time I pull the oil pan off an EcoBoost or a modern modular V8 that suffered premature valve train failure at 75,000 miles. The factory oil control module is programmed to drop oil pressure down to dangerously low thresholds, sometimes as low as 20 psi or even lower at warm-hot idle, in the name of reducing parasitic drag on the oil pump rotor. When your engine is idling at a stoplight with the oil temperature hovering at 210 degrees Fahrenheit, that computer-dictated low-pressure strategy cuts fluid volume to your cylinder heads, your hydraulic lash adjusters, and your timing chain tensioners. The hidden mechanical reality is that low oil pressure combined with high operating temperatures starves the furthest points of your lubrication circuit, specifically the upper cam journals and the secondary timing chains hanging off the front of the block. At 20 psi of hot idle pressure, the hydraulic tensioners holding your timing chains tight lose their internal rigidity, allowing the heavy steel chains to slap against their plastic guides with thousands of rapid micro-impacts every minute. I have personally pulled timing covers off engines where this low-pressure flutter chewed the plastic chain guides down to bare metal, leaving a trail of plastic debris that plugs your oil pickup tube screen and starves the entire bottom end for oil. Worse yet, when you stomp the throttle from a low idle state, there is a fraction of a second lag before the electronic oil control solenoid can ramp pressure back up, meaning your rod bearings experience momentary high-load shock spikes while operating on a thin, compromised oil wedge. That momentary metal-to-metal contact during transient throttle inputs is what scuffs your main bearings and leaves glitter in your oil filter. What should you do instead? Stop accepting the factory idle drop as harmless. If you own an equipped model where you can monitor actual oil pressure via a diagnostic tool or an aftermarket gauge, keep an eye on your hot idle numbers. Whenever you are sitting in extended traffic or waiting for a long light, tap the throttle gently to bump your engine speed up to about 1,100 revolutions per minute for a few seconds, forcing the oil pump to spin faster and flush fresh, high-pressure oil back through your valve train and tensioners. Furthermore, do not buy into the corporate lie of 15,000-mile oil change intervals. Change your oil every 5,000 miles religiously, using a high-viscosity synthetic that maintains its shear strength when the computer tries to lean out your oil pressure at operating temperature. Setting 2. The factory exhaust gas recirculation and positive crankcase ventilation dilution strategy. Here is the common behavior. You drive your Ford back and forth on short commutes, maybe a 10-minute run to the grocery store or a quick trip across town, trusting that your modern emissions equipment is keeping the air clean while your engine runs efficiently behind the scenes. Ford's marketing claim is that their closed-loop emissions management systems route unburnt hydrocarbons and blow-by gases cleanly through the intake tract, utilizing advanced thermal cycling to burn off pollutants and keep your combustion chambers pristine without any extra maintenance required on your part. But here's what Ford doesn't tell you, and what I scrape out of intake manifolds and intake valve backs with a wire brush every single week. The factory computer logic is programmed to aggressively route exhaust gas recirculation, EGR gases, and heavy crankcase blow-by oil vapors back into your intake tract the moment your engine coolant reaches a baseline operating temperature, regardless of whether those gases have time to fully vaporize. On short trips, where your engine oil never reaches the 212 degrees Fahrenheit threshold required to boil off accumulated water condensation inside the crankcase, your positive crankcase ventilation, PCV system, sucks a vile, acidic soup of raw fuel, unburnt soot, and water vapor right back through your throttle body. The hidden mechanical reality is that on modern direct injection engines, fuel is sprayed directly into the combustion chamber, rather than washing over the back of the intake valves like it did on old port injection setups. When that oily, soot-laden EGR mist hits the back of your hot intake valves, it bakes onto the metal stems and tulip faces instantly, forming a rock-hard carbon crust that grows thicker with every heat cycle. I have pulled intake manifolds off trucks with less than 60,000 miles, where the carbon buildup behind the intake valves was so severe it choked off 50% of the intake runner cross-section, causing catastrophic airflow turbulence, erratic idle speeds, random cylinder misfires, and a permanent loss of volumetric efficiency. Your engine is literally choking on its own waste because the factory emissions strategy prioritizes a lab test emissions score over the physical cleanliness of your combustion tract. What should you do instead? Stop running your Ford exclusively on short 5-minute grocery getter trips where the engine never gets a chance to fully heat soak. Once a week, take your truck out on the highway and run it for at least 20 to 30 minutes at sustained highway speeds, allowing your oil temperature to climb past 210 degrees and stay there long enough to vaporize the moisture and fuel dilution sitting in your crankcase before it can be sucked back through your intake. If you own a direct injection engine, do not wait for your engine to start misfiring. Install a high-quality oil catch can on your PCV line to trap that oily sludge before it ever touches your intake valves, and budget for a professional walnut shell intake valve blasting every 60,000 miles to strip away the carbon crust your factory settings left behind. We have just walked through how factory idle pressure drops and sludge pumping emission strategies are silently choking your valve train and turning your intake valves into solid carbon. But all of that damage pales in comparison to the single most deceptive, destructive calibration Ford engineers ever signed off on. Setting number 1 is an adaptive software routine so insidious that most owners actually praise it for saving them fuel, while underneath the valve covers, it is hammering your pistons and rod bearings with violent, destructive detonation every single time you tip into the throttle. Let's get into it. Setting 1. The factory adaptive ignition timing and knock suppression strategy. Here's the common behavior. You pull into the local fuel station, grab the cheapest regular unleaded pump handle because gas prices are through the roof, fill your tank, and drive away feeling financially smart, noticing zero pinging or knocking noises coming from under the hood. Ford's marketing claim is that their state-of-the-art powertrain control module features lightning-fast knock sensors and adaptive ignition timing software designed to automatically adjust spark advance on the fly, allowing your modern high-compression or turbocharged engine to run safely on regular 87-octane fuel without sacrificing reliability or long-term durability. But here's what Ford doesn't tell you, and what I see when I tear down engines that dropped a piston land or spun a main bearing prematurely under heavy load. The factory ignition timing map is aggressively optimized around a rolling baseline that assumes you are running premium fuel, but the adaptive software is programmed to aggressively retard spark timing the moment piezoelectric knock sensors detect acoustic vibration frequencies associated with pre-ignition or detonation. On paper, Ford tells you your engine is fully compatible with regular fuel. What they leave out of the brochure is the hidden mechanical cost of that continuous, reactive correction cycle. The hidden mechanical reality is that low-octane fuel burns too fast and too violently under cylinder pressures, creating hotspots inside the combustion chamber that trigger micro-detonation events before the spark plug even fires. When your knock sensors pick up that destructive shock wave, the computer instantly pulls timing, sometimes retarding spark by 10 or 12 degrees to save the engine from immediate catastrophic failure. But that reaction is not instantaneous. It happens after the detonation has already occurred. Every time you climb a hill, pull a trailer, or tip into the throttle on cheap gas, your engine experiences hundreds of silent, high-frequency pressure spikes that hammer your piston crowns, beat your top piston rings flat against their grooves, and send shock waves straight down your connecting rods into your rod bearings. I have pulled pistons out of EcoBoost engines running exclusively on regular fuel, where the outer edges of the aluminum piston crowns looked like they had been beaten with a ball-peen hammer, and the top compression ring lands were completely cracked off. The factory computer protects the engine just enough to keep it from blowing up inside the warranty period, but it cannot stop the cumulative metallurgical fatigue caused by millions of tiny, unsuppressed detonation shockwaves. You aren't saving money by buying cheap gas. You are simply borrowing structural integrity from your engine's future lifespan, trading a few cents per gallon today for a multi-thousand-dollar rebuild tomorrow. What should you do instead? Stop feeding a high-compression or turbocharged engine a diet of cheap regular fuel just because the sticker on the fuel door says it is technically allowed. If your owner's manual specifies premium fuel for maximum performance, or if you regularly tow, haul heavy payloads, or drive in hot weather, run top-tier 91 or 93 octane fuel exclusively. If you must run regular fuel for commuting, keep your throttle inputs moderate, avoid wide-open throttle passes up steep grades, and let your engine breathe clean, high-octane energy that burns evenly without forcing your knock sensors to fight a continuous war against destructive pre-ignition. Conclusion. What we have covered today isn't theoretical garage talk or internet forum speculation. It is the cold, hard physical reality of what happens when corporate compliance targets and EPA fuel economy test loops collide with the mechanical laws of internal combustion. Ford engineers built your truck to survive a specific set of standardized laboratory tests and a warranty period that expires long before these cumulative failures manifest on your dime. They programmed your transmission to shift cold, your cooling fans to sit idle while your block bakes, your oil pressure to drop at idle to chase fractions of a percent in parasitic drag, your intake tracks to choke on their own blow-by emissions, and your ignition timing to live on the knife edge of destructive detonation. You can keep driving your Ford as an unthinking consumer who accepts every factory default as gospel, or you can take control of how this machine operates beneath your feet. You now know that the warning lights, the hidden menus, and the factory calibrations are just starting points, not immutable laws of physics. If this deep dive saved you from a premature engine rebuild, or opened your eyes to what's really happening under your hood, hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next teardown, and drop a comment below telling me which of these factory settings shocked you the most. Stop letting corporate software dictate how your investment ages. Take back control of your maintenance, feed your engine what it actually demands to survive, and keep your hard-earned money out of the dealership service bay where it belongs.